everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Clear as Mud, where we talk to game developers from all walks of life about their personal and professional journeys. I'm your host, Graham Waldrop. As always, our show is presented by Mudstack, the only asset management and collaboration tool custom built for game studios and digital artists. For more information, head over to mudstack.com. Today, we're talking with Darren Yeomans, studio director at Atomhawk Design Limited. Darren has worked in the game industry for over 30 years as an artist, an outsourced teams manager, and now a studio director. The show is packed with great stuff. We talk about the differences between working in the industry in its nascent stages compared to now, Darren's experience working on 50 Cent, Blood on the Sand, and how Atomhawk has established itself as one of the premier game development outsourced studios in the world, having worked on games in the FIFA series, PUBG, and Halo. So outsourcing is a huge part of this episode, and it's really cool because Darren has been the outsourcer, and now he is the outsourcee. So he's seen both sides of the fence. He knows what works, he knows what doesn't. If you have any issues with outsourcing with your own teams, this is a great episode to listen to because Darren has a load of wisdom to drop on you. And the 50 Cent story is also amazing. I don't want to spoil anything, but it's really cool learning how that game came to be. So without further ado, here's Darren. So Darren, tell me what sort of made you want to move into doing this outsourcing stuff? Because I think it's really cool, all the projects that you've worked on, from like PUBG to Halo and the FIFA and so many others that your company has worked on. What made you really want to get into that and help out these other teams making games?
I suppose it was complete accident, really. At the time, I was working for Swordfish Studios, and it got to the point where we realized that you can no longer make AAA games with just the kind of 60 people in your office. And you needed more help to do that because the games were getting bigger and more sophisticated. And at the time, I was a lead artist there. But I'm one of these artists whose both sides of the brain works. The creative side and the kind of logical side are quite equal. So I was the kind of artist who would just generally get things done and organise people and make sure the schedule was on time and the work was kind of divvied out properly. So when it came to kind of looking at help and getting extra people to do the work for, to get the game out, they just came to me kind of naturally and said, well, we need to look at this outsourcing thing. We don't know what it is. We don't know who's out there. Off you go. And it was really good, actually. They gave me a good 12 months to really get to know the lay of the land. I visited China and a few studios there, visited India and a few studios there, and kind of realized the amount of people that were available to us and the kind of skill set they had. So I was able to set up a pipeline for the studio to make sure that we had the outsourcing pipeline to create and continue to create the AAA games that we were doing. So going into that, it became apparent very quickly that I could no longer be an artist and do that as well. There was just too much work involved. So it's around about 2007, I think it was. I had to make a decision. Do I stick with art or do I go into management full time? And that's where I went into management full time. So that's kind of my journey took a swing then and took me to where I am now, which is great. And that's one of the things that you kind of look for in your career, those opportunities and those chances. You never know where they're going to take you. So I always just jump on it when I can. But obviously, you've got to make sure you're ready for that when that opportunity comes. So doing that kind of role since kind of 2007 made it really easy for me when I joined Atomhawk. Because Atomhawk are on the other side of the fence. We're the ones that help out all these clients all over the world with all their great games. So I had a great insight of what do dev studios need, how can we kind of really make that happen for them, how can we ease the pain for them. So that transition was quite natural for me.
And you already sound like you were pretty good at managing people before you went full time into managing as well, or at least getting things organized. So having that experience, getting your hands dirty in the day-to-day grind also must just have been really helpful for when you transition full-time into management.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things of being a full-time artist at that point was that I kind of knew if someone was trying to pull a wool over my eyes and say, that's going to take this amount of time and we can't do that with this. And, I knew full well that what was available and what was doable. So it was good to say, well, actually, that's not going to take you 3 weeks. That'll take you a week tops. And so it was really good from that point of view, and being able to schedule and kind of manage some of those relationships that you have, especially in the early days with outsourcing. It wasn't quite the kind of Wild West that early dev was, but it was certainly having to find its feet very quickly.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that sort of bugged me when I did work more in the industry was, I did like production things and things like that. But I knew how to 3D model and texture and things like that. I wasn't very good at it, but I mean, like I knew that the basic principles of it. But I never like really worked on a team where that was my role. So even though I knew kind of like what it took to perform those duties, it was always like, well, I really don't know at the same time.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you just get confident with and build up over time. When I started, it was all pixel based. And then when 3D came along, you had to learn that. So that's one of the things I always tell people who ask me for advice, students or anybody else. You have to take your time, and you have to kind of learn as you're going. And it's one of those industries that you're constantly learning and constantly trying out new methods. Because you'll do a game for like 3 to 5 years and you'll use one specific method and one engine for doing that. And then the next game you do, you probably never use that same method again. You're constantly progressing. So making sure you've got all of that knowledge and keeping that going really does help as well, gain your confidence and be able to set you up for scheduling and having conversations with people who are going to be charging you millions for work they're doing.
Yeah, like this is one of the industries where you really can never get comfortable. Something new is always around the bend, engine-wise, technology-wise.
Absolutely.
And like, the differences between working, in a proprietary engine versus an Unreal, a Unity.
Yeah. And, when you talk about kind of, in-house engines, they all seem to want to do what Unreal and Unity do anyway. So, you might as well just get on that and crack on with that. Some have got the engines that have developed over, decades now, if I'm thinking back to some of the games I used to work on, that, a little bit changes every time and it gets this big unwieldy beast then that, if you have to send out, part of your engine to any of the outsourcers to look at and try and, get things in game for you, it does cause some issues. So anything that you can use that's, like an Unreal or a Unity that's kind of universally known and used, it's always a good thing to do.
So when you first went on that journey, that sort of year-long journey to figure out how outsourcing works, how did that change? How did your plan sort of evolve over time as you started to gather more information?
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. It was just, gathering information. It was, jumping on the internet and just typing in outsourcing and see what it spat out at the time. So we were able to get a good list together. First port of call was obviously just to talk to these guys. So, we'd jump on a phone call and just see what the communication was like. Because obviously, you're talking to people in China or India who, English isn't their first language. So that first thing you must do is make sure that communication is there for you. So we're able to kind of write off a few straight away because we just couldn't get the communication over the phone done. And that was really important at the time. And then we went through and got to know them and had a few conversations with the teams that were in China and India, and then sent out some tests. And it was the same kind of head test that we sent out, which involved some hair and how they were going to approach that. And the really, really interesting thing was you could tell which region it was when it came back, because even though we gave them reference of the character, they had their own twist on that, their own kind of regional twist. So, the Indian ones would come back with a slight Indian feel to them, with to the character's face, and the Chinese one would have a slight Chinese twist to it as well. So that was quite interesting at the beginning, and seeing, this is going to be a cultural thing. We're going to have to look beyond just throwing work at them and hoping it's going to come back. So quite very early on, I realised that the best way of working with outsourcing was to treat them like intern teams. We didn't just throw work at them because communication would break down. It'd be too much trouble doing that. So we took real time to embed their teams with our teams. And I think we're one of the first studios to really do that and concentrate on that. Because I remember some of the conversations I was having in the early days, it was just like, we just give them 50 briefs to do and we expect it back in a month. And it's like, well, you've got to you've got to make them feel part of the team. It's something that you want to include them with. We often found we got better results because they just felt more invested in what we were doing. So me going out, and we chose three partners in the end to work with us. So there was our go-tos, there was our second one, and then there was our kind of lucky dip, if you like, and see how they get on, because they're really nice people, and we'll see how we get on with them. And the third ones ended up working out the best for us, because I think they appreciated all of the work we put into that relationship to make sure that they felt part of the team and knew exactly where we were going, and kind of were fully invested in it. That we were able then to, towards the end, we were running a bit short on time, which dev usually does, and we just said to them, look, we need another section doing of this environment. You know the environment, you've worked on it before. Can you do something for us? And they went off and they did that, and it worked out really well for us, which is great. And it's not always the case, because what I found over the years is that outsource studios are very, very good at doing what you've asked them to do. That's their business. That's what they're set up to do. They are really good at doing that. Where they kind of struggle is if you ask them to add anything creatively to that. Thinking within the genre, thinking within the style that you've got, and going, okay, we understand this, and we're confident now we could offer more for you. Working at Atomhawk now, and being on the other side of the fence, that's something that we realise, and we offer more value to our clients, and I think that's why they keep coming back, which is absolutely perfect.
Consequently, I would imagine that makes you guys feel like you're part of their team, being able to have that agency, be able to come to the table with a perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we always make sure that we integrate with whatever engine they're using, whatever methods they're using, whatever protocols they've got. We always amend ourselves to that. We've got quite a big production team, so we take that kind of hurt out of the managing of projects with that. And that's one thing I noticed on the other side when I was in dev, is that I was always looking for that one company who could just take something off me and say, don't worry, we'll get this for you. There's one thing you don't have to worry about. We'll sort that out.
Right.
So that's one of the ethos that I brought in when I became studio director, and thought, right, okay, this is something we've got to push on with. We've got to make sure that they want to come to our clients, come to us first, because we make life easier for them. And that's what anybody ever wants, is just, get the work back to the quality, to the benchmark, on time. And if their life's been made easier, then that's the service that you can't beat.
Before we get into more of what Atomhawk does, I want to go pretty deep into that, or as deep as you want to go into it. I sort of want to get to know more about, because you've been in the industry for a long time, since like the early 90s, right? So it's
this month is my 30th anniversary this month.
30th anniversary, man. Yeah. Wow. So yeah, I sort of want to get like a little bit of perspective on the early days, how you came up in the industry, and sort of day-to-day life culture, how different it was, and I'm sure all respects. I mean, we know obviously technologically, but I'm sure culturally, and just how you work with people. So I'd love to just take a trip back in time 30 years ago.
Again, it was a complete accident how I got into the industry. I went to college and I was doing graphic design because I was going into advertising. And in the early 90s in the UK, there was a big recession, as there seems to be every 10 years or so in the UK. And I was made redundant. So I went to my local job centre and kind of signed on for 3 or 4 months, kind of wondering, what do I do now? The job centre kind of looked at me and went, "You're an artist. We've got no jobs for artists. What do you want to do? We can get you a job here or there." And I'm like thinking, I really want to do, I really want to stick at art. It's, I've always been creative. It's something I've always wanted to do. And then out of the blue, December 92, the Oliver twins were setting up their first proper business. They started out in their bedroom, and 2 or 3 of them working together to create lots of games. And they kind of saw there was a market for that. And they started their first office in Leamington Spa. And that's where I was living at the time. And they put an advert at the job centre looking for an artist. And the job centre said, "You're an artist. Go along to this, see what you think." And it was absolutely brilliant. I was working on an Amiga, and I was just messing with the pixels because I'd only had very limited kind of usage of any kind of computers in the 90s. Because when obviously growing up in the 70s and 80s, machines were available, but they're very expensive. So we just couldn't afford that kind of thing. So having this Amiga to play with was absolutely fantastic, and it just a complete eye opener for me. And they gave me the machine to use over the Christmas period. And I came back and showed them what I'd been working on, and they went, "Yeah, we'll take you on as a junior artist." And I just absolutely fell in love with it straight away. Moving pixels about and doing animation with that was mind blowing. Really interesting. And I kind of mentioned the Wild West earlier, and the early days of dev. Certainly in Leamington, it felt like that at times. We all lived and breathed computer games, and the projects that we're working on. We would work, from 9 till 6. We'd all go to the pub and have a drink and have some lunch. Then come back and play games into midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and we did that. We did that for about 3 or 4 years, and that was just the culture at that time. It was very male dominated at the time.
Mm-hmm.
There was one female in our office who was the secretary, but there was no kind of female devs. So it was very much a boys' club. So playing hard, working hard was seen as the norm. Looking back now, you could never do the hours that we were doing then. Some of the programmers would actually have like a jar of coffee next to them, and they would just spoon feed coffee into themselves just to try and keep awake because there was no energy drinks or anything.
Oh, they wouldn't even make coffee. They just eat the coffee
straight
wow.
from the jar. Straight from the jar.
That's hardcore.
It was one of those kind of unsaid rules that, because I'm working hard and I'm putting all of this in, everybody else has to. So you just felt obliged to work the hours that everybody did, to get the jobs done. And it was great fun. The amount of laughs that we used to have after work, playing Quake or Doom or Duke Nukem, on a LAN. That was, it was 6 or 7 of you playing, the same game at that time was such fun. Yeah, I mean, surprisingly, my wife at the moment, I met her back then, and she put up with that for those many years, thankfully, and she's still with me now. But it was very much play hard, work hard. Thankfully, that has changed. Thankfully, there's more females in the industry. It's becoming more inclusive. We're getting more diversity in there. So it's a business. You have to come in now with that kind of career head on you. Where am I going to go? And universities kind of give you an idea of what you can do and the kind of track that you can go on. But back in the early days, it was just fun. It was just absolute fun, and which was great. But burning the candle at both ends gets to you after a while. It took me 8 years before I realised, I can't be doing this any longer. I've got to slow down somewhere, and making games isn't my life. It's part of my life. It's a big part of my life, but it's not my life. I've got to step back from that. And thankfully, I did learn that lesson. Was able to kind of get a really good balance back in my life. But yeah, at the time, quite a few people I worked with just burnt out, and there wasn't the support that's around now. So kind of anything around mental health wasn't heard of then. So you were just left to burn out, and it was kind of you do or die. That's what certainly the kind of UK industry was kind of built on. I don't know of any studio that was much different to that at the time. Everybody wanted to do more. Everybody wanted to be better. Everybody was putting the hours in.
Do you think there's anything from those old days that you miss, that you wish was still a part of how the industry works now?
I miss the ability to be able to have total control over a project that you were on. So the money, the money was there. It wasn't as great as it is today, and it wasn't as invested into as it is today. Knowing that the 8 or 10 of you in that studio were fully responsible for getting this thing done, making sure it played well, making sure it was fun, doing all the marketing for it, and then going out and finding a publisher for it. That was really exciting. I suppose right up until the point until you can't get a publisher, or the publisher that you had turns around and says, no, we don't want that now. Then you're in, you have to find something else to do very quickly after that. But I suppose it was that kind of camaraderie, that kind of getting together and making something great with the team that you had. The studios that I've grown more in have been more like that. Thankfully being in a position where I was able to foster that and make sure that we've got that. Yes, we're going to be creative. Yes, we're going to do a great game. But do you know what? We're not going to kill ourselves doing it.
Do you think there's value though in, someone who is really just starting out to put in the extra time, not even necessarily working in the studio, but just outside the studio, doing things on their own, trying to get better, trying to really master their craft, going beyond, the 40-hour work week sort of thing?
I would say yes, but with the caveat is that artists generally tend to draw anyway. They tend to want to create anyway. So, when you leave work at 6 o'clock in the evening, you'll go home and you've got your own project that you're working on, that you're just trying out things and you're working on something better. So I find with artists, it's, they generally want to get better anyway. So it's one of those things where we encourage, but also we have to kind of keep in mind of how many hours they're doing, because obviously if they're doing 8 hours, 9 hours once they leave work, then that's not a good thing either, because you're still burning the candle at both ends, but this time half of it's for your fulfillment, but it's still draining, it's still mentally exhausting. And like I say, we're now set up to be able to identify those things and put things in place to go, just, take a step back, take a week off, chill out, get yourself back to, feeling fresh, and then come back swinging, as it were. So, I mean, the same with, I suppose, programmers. All the programmers I've known over the years, they've always had something going on in the background that they're working on, that they're kind of always pushing themselves. One of the biggest messages that I take when I do talks at universities, okay, it's great, doing what the course has set you and doing it well, but so are the other 100 people in that class. So are all the other thousands over the world doing the exact same thing. If you want to stick out, you're going to have to do a little bit more to get yourself noticed and try things out and just get better at your craft.
Yeah, so like transitioning from that period to 50 Cent Blood on the Sand. Because I remember we talked about this before before the podcast. I'm fascinated to hear about the stories of developing that game, and I think I did actually play it because I used to be back in the day a really big 50 Cent fan.
And do you know what? It was a really fun game. Playing snobbery around games. It was just fun. It was you knew what you were going to get.
It was fun.
Yeah,
you guys, like, I could tell, especially after like watching the somebody play it on YouTube again. I was like, this development team is clearly having a blast with this. Like, the whole story is ridiculous.
Yeah,
like absolutely. 50 Cent tracking down terrorists and people stealing stuff that he wants to get his $10 million for the concert he played.
Yeah, he wanted his crystal skull back.
His crystal skull, yeah. The whole story is ridiculous, and but I gotta say this though. I mean, when the game came out, it was like the early days of like PS3, 360, and things like that, right? Or pretty early days. Yeah. So it's like, I mean, especially for what you guys were doing then, like gameplay wise, like a lot of the over the shoulder shooting and the cover mechanics. You could definitely tell it was of its time, but I was like, this game works.
I mean, it actually started out as a very serious game. It was in development for about 18 months, 2 years before it became 50 Cent Blood on the Sand. And we were working on a Tom Clancy title. We had several kind of vertical slices already done. One of them was in Amsterdam. One was in a kind of huge kind of farm field with farm buildings. And there's a small town section. So it was already kind of well developed, and we were going down this kind of like stealthy game with lots of mechanics around kind of puzzles and kind of stealthy shooting and all of that. And the publisher at the time, we were going through all the different kind of green light stages with them. And they were going, yeah, this is great, and we like this mechanic here. And then totally out of the blue, kind of like 2 years into it, they said, we want you to turn it into 50 Cent game. And it's like, you what? So, they obviously got the IP to use 50 Cent. And it was like, okay, we've just spent 2 years doing this stealthy puzzle kind of game, and with firing and lots of kind of thinking about it. And now you want us to throw into just kind of mayhem and madness with using 50 Cent. And it's one of those times then when everybody gets together and goes, okay, how are we going to do this?
Yeah, and you guys didn't make the first game, right? The Bulletproof game. That was a different
that was
studio.
Different.
Yeah.
I actually ended up working with someone who worked on the first one and kind of commented that the second one was really good. So that was a nice thing.
Yeah, like I remember that first one being really disappointing in the sense that it kind of took itself seriously and the gameplay wasn't very good. And you guys just kind of did a complete 180 where the gameplay was fun. The story was silly, but it needed to be silly. And I think it was pretty successful overall. Particularly, I had no idea that it was a different game beforehand. I mean, that's even more impressive that you're able to make a really fun game that you weren't even supposed to make.
And again, you take the learnings from everything that you do. And the kind of first 18 months, 2 years of that title being in production, we were learning Unreal and using that within our pipeline and getting that up to speed. And, we were setting up an outsourcing pipeline to enable us to work in that. And so you take the positives, you take the learnings, and you move on.
Did you get to, or the studio get to work at all with 50 Cent and his team? Were they collaborative? Were they giving y'all ideas, or what was that relationship like?
We were getting that through the publisher. So we didn't have any kind of hands-on kind of meetings with them or anything, although I did get free tickets to go to a 50 Cent concert when he was in the UK.
Nice.
So that was a good thing. I ended up giving those to my son and my daughter at the time, and they, so I was king for that day because I'd got them tickets.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I mean it's one of those. I've worked on a few titles that have had famous people associated with them, and very rarely, certainly the kind of project and position I was in at the time, they wouldn't come into the studio and they wouldn't kind of actively be involved in things. I've heard stories, where the famous person has really kind of dictated all other things, and it just doesn't work. Then you've got to have that creative lead that knows what they want from the game, knows where it's going to go. The worst for me, the worst experience I've had when working on games, and you can see it from a mile off, is that the executive producer or the creative director is playing lots of different games. So they come back the next month and go, we should really make it like this game that I'm playing because it's really fun and we should really do this with it. And it's like that, it kills it dead. It kills it dead. You've got to have that one vision. You've got that one creative person that says, I'm going to take you on this journey. Come with me. It's going to be great.
And I think one of the things that's probably the best thing to do is when you start making something is don't play anything while you're making it that's going to be like really directly related to what you're making.
Yeah.
Like the time for that is over at that point. Like you should have done that beforehand.
Absolutely. And I suppose one of the last fad I can remember is like all the Fortnite games that come out afterwards. And if a game's already been released and you're working on your title now and you're perhaps 2 years into it, you've got another at least 2 years for that to run and do its cycle. So if you're trying to copy a game that's been released now, that's going to be 2 years old by the time yours is released. So you've got to have that vision, you've got to stand by it, and you've got to kind of believe in it and get your team behind you and all go for that one thing. I've also been on titles where the vision has been absolutely rock solid. And the one I'm thinking of is Driver San Francisco. The mechanic on that I had never seen before, and I've not seen since, where you could just switch between cars, switch between players at an instant, and go and join another race or be in a different car. And that came from one vision, one clear vision, one clear direction that everybody was going towards. I'm not saying it didn't have its problems, and it did go over, but they absolutely stuck to that vision, and I think the mechanic that came out of that is absolutely tremendous.
Yeah, that's just going to make things also just a hell of a lot easier on your team. You have to like refactor a bunch of stuff, or like get rid of a bunch of assets, things like that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's the thing now. I mean, back in the day, you were reliant on that one person making those choices, and a team can sniff out a producer who does that all day long now, because everybody's got access to all of these games. Everybody plays them as much as the executive producers do. They can see what they're doing, and the confidence just gets drained from the team when that happens. You want to be able to follow that one person. Go, yeah, I'm with this guy. I'm really going to make this happen. But as soon as they start going, oh, I've played this game and I've done that, his focus goes, and next thing you know, you're 20 million over budget, and you've got to try and make this happen now, and it's got to be a success now.
Yeah. And that shows also just like an extreme lack of confidence in the original design, to the point where it's like you're so easily influenced by something else. You think something else is so much better than what you're doing. It's like, well, I have to do that or I can't compete. And it's like, well, yeah, then you're just compromising the whole thing.
Absolutely. And then, there's the other thing as well, when I've seen a couple of projects that have tried kind of new mechanics and tried kind of reinventing the wheel when it really didn't need to be reinvented.
Yeah.
And that you see and you think it's not going to work. And it doesn't matter how many times you tell them it's not going to work. They just plow ahead. And then it's like, you're 2 years into that, and then you have to stop and then go and use Unreal because the method you were trying to do is never going to work in the first place.
Right. I can't imagine having something that is, you've been working on for 2 years, and then it's like, well, that's not going to work. It's like that should be sniffed out so fast. That should be sniffed out like in this prototyping stage, and when you're figuring out, the fun of the game. And it's like, if you can't find the fun, then that's okay. Like, get rid of that prototype. Let's start another one. It's not the end of the world. We don't have to be married to it. That's why it's a prototype.
It's usually, well, the two that I've kind of really come across and straight away I knew it wasn't going to work was, procedurally creating maps and creating objects and buildings within those maps. And it's just like there's so many different equations that's going to trip you up by trying to do that.
Yeah.
Just build a different map. Build 3 maps instead of building 1 map and schedule that in, because you know how to do that and you know how that works.
Yeah.
And you're not going to gain anything spectacular on top of what you were doing otherwise. And both the games that I've worked on that started out procedural, both of them, despite being told by several people this isn't going to work, went over years.
Yeah.
And then ended up having to use a different engine, and that's infuriating as well. But again, everything's a learning process. You take everything and kind of think, okay, well, if I get in that position, I won't do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I remember, what was that game? No Man's Sky. There was like thousands of planets you could explore that were procedurally generated. And I remember that game launched, everybody was like, this didn't work at all. But like they kept working on it. And eventually, I think it got to a decent spot where it was working well. I think that game's still alive and kicking. But that was it sounded like a very tumultuous development process.
You want to try and keep it easy and adding extra things like, yes, if it's going to give you that extra 10%, if it's going to be that thing that nobody's seen before, absolutely go for it. But if it's not going to bring you anything on top of if you just do 3 versions instead of procedurally trying to change something on the fly, then don't do it.
Yeah, especially for something like an environment. That's just so much variance. Of course, you're going to run into problems with that. Whereas I could see something like, I can't remember the name of the studio, but there's Shadow of Mordor games where it was like they're going to procedurally generate like bosses based on like certain characteristics. Like that worked out pretty well because that was a pretty limited in scope. It was still a cool idea, but you could tell like, all right, they were like, all right, it doesn't have to go that crazy.
If you're going to do something and make it look like you're getting lots of usage out of it, then just do it sparingly.
Yeah. Okay, so circling back to like your work now with Atomhawk, what's the process like for like a studio reaching out to you and getting the ball rolling in terms of they have a need, obviously they need to fill, and they reach out to you. How does that begin?
Well, it could be lots of different ways. I mean, we have lots of returning clients. The way the industry is, people move from studio to studio. So, that's why if you make sure you do a good job for someone, you make sure you have a good relationship with them, that they'll take you to where they go next. Some people, it could come straight through the website. We have some that come through our art stations, some come through LinkedIn, some come through personally. I think if people want to work with us, they find a way of getting in contact with us. This year, I think we worked on around about 80 different titles with different studios,
wow,
with different clients, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And, having the insight to, the games that people are going to be playing in 3 to 5 years now, because we're helping define them and structure those, is a very exciting place to be. So Clients know where we are now. We're still pushing. We still want to be bigger. We still want to make sure that we're the first two or three names on people's lips when they want to get work done.
With 80 projects in a year, I mean, you guys must be meticulous as all hell with planning and really good at managing things. So how do you define the scope of these projects with your clients?
The projects that we work with, we worked with PUBG. They wanted the next game that we do. How do we what's this game about? What's the world about? How do you define why people are jumping out of planes? And getting in a project at such an early stage like that and getting your teeth into is really rewarding for everyone. But then sometimes you get projects come in that get so well-defined characters and IP that you just have to be very careful and stick to that, as true as you can be. And some of our engagements are 3 years, 4 years. Some can be 3 months, and then they'll come back in another 6 months to do another batch of work with us. Because we've been going for so long now, 2009, we've got a good handle on how long things take. And I've got to give props to our production team because they're very good at scheduling and planning, and coming at it from a creative point of view. They understand that you've got to build in a little bit of time for juniors, for example, to kind of get up to speed and get on track and feel comfortable. So whenever we do things, we always make sure you've got that aspect and that time in there to help them succeed in doing that. I can't remember in the last 5 years, a project where we undercooked it so much that we had to do any overtime, because we don't do overtime. The world that you came from with your production side, you can understand that if you do your job well, it really helps out everyone. A bad production team or bad producer can absolutely put a project behind by years.
And especially because you guys do a lot. I mean, you cover all, UI, production art, the list goes on. So, I mean, I think it's really cool, like the amount of services that you guys offer to clients. I mean, it's not just like one thing. It's like, oh, we just went to them for animation or whatever. It's like, no, you can go to your studio for just about anything.
Yeah, and that was a conscious thing. Because historically, people came to us for kind of UI, a little bit of animation, 2.5D animation, and obviously concept work. But for my extensive kind of dev background, I always wanted to get a little bit more of that kind of, let's see what else we can do for our clients. Let's get some 3D, let's get some more UI, UX, let's get some more animation in there. So I've been pushing towards that for the last 2 or 3 years. So now we're working with clients on live dev projects where we're creating 3D assets for the game, and we're taking that through from conception right the way through the design journey to actual final 3D things in game. And that was the kind of holy grail that I was looking for as a client. Just please, someone just take this brief for me and just run with it. Design the characters that we've asked for. Let's get some backs and forwards on that. Let's get some iteration on those, and go away and build it for me and rig it and get it all animated. So that's now the services that we offer. So that's enabling us now to recruit a more broader kind of art group that we never really did before. So just making sure that our clients are aware of that, and more so, as I say, for recruitment purposes, that people in universities know that we can now start doing that with them. So it's a really exciting time. The next year, next 2 years are going to be really exciting for us. We're going to grow even more and offer more services. We've recently opened a new studio called Atomhawk Advance. That's headed up by Darren, and he looks after all the kind of technical aspects of art for us. So we're even expanding into that space. So working directly in engines, working on tools, getting UI put in, getting the UX sorted out. So holistically, we're now able to offer more to more clients. And again, it's one of those things that if you look at our website, it's usually kind of 2 years old, the things that you see on there. Because we need permission to show things. We need to wait for games to come out and finish before we can show them. So it's just kind of like the tip of the iceberg of what we do and kind of how much more we can do. So obviously getting the word out is really important for us.
What do you think is the key, or what has been the key for your studio in terms of building a good culture and making sure people are excited to come to work and things like that?
When it was founded, it was founded by artists, so they understood how an artist works. Artists are very different people to programmers or to engineers. They're very different people, and you've got to be able to work with them and work with their individuality. One of the things that I do in my spare time, I'm a football coach. I've coached since I've for about 12, 13 years. And with that, you kind of learn each individual play, their habits, when you need to put an arm around someone, when you need to give someone a good kind of telling and a kind of a sterner kind of approach with them. And it's very much like that with artists. And most of our team are from abroad. Most of them are under 25, 30. Some of them, it's usually their first job or their first time moving away from home. So we have a very good structure internally where we help them out with all of that process. I've last year I did shopping for someone who was coming over who wouldn't have been able to get the shopping done because of the COVID restrictions. So I went out personally, did some shopping for them, put it in their new flat ready for them to arrive. And that's the kind of thing that we do. We realise that they're away from home. You've got to make it feel like home for them. You've got to make it feel comfortable. Otherwise, they won't come to work. Won't want to come to work. They won't want to be creative, and it's just going to impact on clients. So for us, absolutely, the first thing we've got to do is make sure all the artists are happy, make sure they've got the tools they need to do the job, and make sure they can see the value in the work that they do and the value we put on them with the training and making them better artists overall. So yeah, absolutely, I wouldn't take for granted at all that the team are fantastic and they're the ones that are getting all the glory because they're the ones doing the job day to day. So making them happy, making sure they've got what they need. And over the last few years as well, the kind of mental health side of that has become more important and grown. And all the diversity kind of things have come in now that we have to be absolutely aware of. You asked earlier about the kind of differences, when I started and now, and that's one of the big things now is that you're just so sensitive about everybody's needs and making sure that people are, confident and feel safe in the workplace they are.
Yeah, and I love that too. And it sounds like you guys really put an emphasis on getting to know the individual and really getting to make sure that, like you were talking about, going to shop for somebody. If I'm an employee and you do something like that for me, then I'm going to run through a wall for you. I'm ready to go to work, super excited. Not that I wouldn't be, but now I'm really like, oh man, this company really cares about me.
Yeah, and we can't do everything, and we can't do everything that people want us to do, but we do our absolute utmost best, and we show that. One of the big two kind of things for me is being open and honesty. And as long as you're open people, as long as you're honest with people, you don't trip yourself up. You can't remember the lies that you've told or promises that you've made that you knew you weren't going to make. So making sure you're honest and open, it really does work wonders.
All right, that wraps up this week's show. We want to thank Darren for being our guest. To find out more about Mudstack, head over to mudstack.com, where you can follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and join our community on Discord. And of course, we want to thank you for listening. We'll see you next time on Clear as Mud.